Paper Mario Color Splash recently came out, and I couldn't help myself from playing through the game to see if it was any good. Although fans have been critical of the game for its connections to Sticker Star, there's still some fans who seem to enjoy Paper Mario Color Splash. For this video, I'm going to spoil the game in great detail from beginning to end. If you want to play through the game yourself, I'd recommend watching this once you beat the game. The game starts with a short cutscene with Princess Peach and Toad arriving at Mario's house. They show Mario a paper toad that had all of its color drained from their body, which was sent through the mail from Port Prisma. Mario and Peach decide to go to Port Prisma in order to figure out what's going on, and this kicks off the adventure for the game. Once they arrive, the group runs into a talking paint can named Huey, who acts as Mario's companion throughout the rest of the game. Huey is probably one of the best singular companions that the series has had up to this point. The game's writing really lets Huey stand out when compared to Teepee from Super Paper Mario and whoever the companion was in Sticker Star. Although Huey is just a paint can, he's actually just as likable as the partners from the first two games. He's not the greatest character of all time, but he's enjoyable enough and never takes up too much screen time. It's at Port Prisma where Huey introduces the painting mechanic in the game. Mario can swing his hammer to paint surfaces, which is mainly used to get coins and cards for battle. You also get a taste of the turn-based combat, which is pretty much exactly the same as Sticker Star. Mario has a deck of cards that you can view by looking down at the gamepad, with each card corresponding to a different attack. Once you place your card down, the card is then consumed and Mario then attacks the first enemy in the line. The paint mechanic also plays a role in the turn-based combat, since Mario can paint his cards in order to increase their damage. The gamepad is used to select what cards you want to attack with, and it's extremely slow. Every turn you have to shuffle through your deck to pick your cards, place each card in the correct position, confirm these are the cards you want to pick, then you paint the cards, confirm the card's been painted, and then you have to flick the cards on TV. This is a needlessly convoluted system that could have been fixed with some proper menus. Although navigating the gamepad takes a long time, the setup for the system seems fine enough. The idea is you want to make your cards as efficient as possible without wasting all of your paint. The incentive to fight enemies in Paper Mario Color Splash is to pick up hammer scraps. When Mario picks up a certain amount of scraps, he'll be able to store more paint into his paint hammer. This kind of linear progression isn't very rewarding, and it's something that shouldn't be in any Paper Mario game. The whole system started with Super Paper Mario, where you'd get points in order to increase your HP and damage, and every game since then has had linear progression systems that are terrible. It's not the best incentive to fight enemies, but it's better than nothing. The main objective of Paper Mario Color Splash is restoring the Prisma Fountain by collecting 6 big paint stars. In order to find the stars, Mario and Huey have to travel across the world collecting mini paint stars, which will lead them in the direction of the big paint stars. Some of the levels only have one mini star hidden in the level, but most of them have multiple mini stars that Mario will eventually have to find. The game starts out pretty linear, but you eventually have to start backtracking through levels in order to figure out how to unlock new paths on the overworld map. It's similar to Sticker Star, but it's presented in a much better fashion. Each level on the map is treated as a different part of the world, where Sticker Star copied the Super Mario series right down to numbering each level. The main themes of the Super Mario series are still present in Paper Mario Color Splash, but it's more of a surprise when you go to each level. Since you're constantly traveling to new levels, the visuals never get too old and still feel fresh, even though there really isn't any level that stands out on its own. Once you get to Cherry Lake, the game starts to introduce some new mechanics into the game. In order to get past the first gate, you have to use the cutout technique by pressing the Y button. It's very similar to the 3D flip mechanic from Super Paper Mario. Once you reach a dead end and can't figure out how to proceed, you just press the Y button in order to progress. You have to figure out how to match up the cut lines with the background, but besides that, it's essentially a brain-dead mechanic that's supposed to make you feel smart. It's a bit hard to explain how it works since I don't have footage of the gamepad, but you essentially walk along the cut lines in a 2D plane in order to access certain areas you wouldn't be able to reach normally. This is the first level that also introduces the thing mechanic from Sticker Star. You have to use the cutout technique to place thing cards into the environment in order to solve puzzles. The thing mechanic was one of the worst parts of Sticker Star that ruined the entire game for me, but Paper Mario Color Splash shows some restraint when using it for puzzle solving. Since your cards are all the same size, they no longer take up a large portion of your inventory, so you can usually carry around all of your thing cards at once, which is a major improvement over Sticker Star. The next level is Blue Bay Beach, and it's here where I realized just how pointless the game's combat actually is. As I said before, the only incentive to fight enemies is to pick up hammer scraps, which will increase the capacity of paint Mario can hold. Since painting your cards increases the damage, you could argue that increasing your paint capacity would increase your overall damage in combat. The problem with the game is that paint isn't a valuable resource. Every level is just littered with paint that I never ran out of of it for the majority of the game. Once you realize that paint isn't valuable, you end up fully painting every card you use. The battles are so short that you never have to worry about running out of paint in battle. You can wipe out an entire line of enemies within seconds, and it's usually faster to kill everyone instead of trying to run away. Even after a battle, the game will instantly reward you with large quantities of paint, as well as shower you with paint and coins at the end of each level. Increasing Mario's paint capacity begins to feel even more pointless than it already was. There's absolutely no incentive to increase your capacity for paint when you're never running out of it. The entire mechanic of painting your cards might as well not even exist at this point. The only thing battling enemies does is waste your cards, which will only limit your card options in a forced encounter. The most logical strategy is to just avoid all the random enemies in the level and paint everything to get cards and coins. Although the painting mechanic is entirely pointless, the developers put a ton of fun little puzzles that use it very well. One puzzle I really enjoyed was at Blue Bay Beach, where you have to guess which toad has a key. The obvious visual difference is that the toad with the key has a paper crease on their head, but it's actually a trick. The toads are cheating the entire time, and you have to paint the toad in order to expose the group for collusion. It's around this part of the game where you have to start backtracking in order to find the 3 chosen toads to open up the door for Crimson Tower. You'll have to start by getting things from the Ringler at Port Prisma, since the game starts using the Think cards to solve puzzles. Daffodil Peak is the first level to introduce the Unfurl block. Once you hit the Unfurl block, you have 20 seconds to hit a specific object in order to unfurl it. This level in particular really starts to show how obnoxious the level design is. I'm not opposed to the linear level design of the game, but what's the point of having multiple exits if you're just going to place them right next to each other in plain sight? All this means is that you have to go through the entire level again for no reason. Since all the puzzles are completed, the only thing obstructing you from the final mini-star are the random enemies on the map, which are not even worth fighting. Once you find the 3 chosen toads, the only place left to go is Crimson Tower. You eventually run into Morton, who ends up being the first boss of the game. Since I played Sticker Star, I knew that I might have to use a Thing card during the fight. Morton eventually reaches a point where he decides to use his Blaze Hammer, and I recently got a fire extinguisher, but I wasn't that focused on using it. It's never required to use the Thing stickers for the boss fights in Sticker Star, but it just makes them much easier. I seemed to be doing good damage against Morton, so I just shook it off. That's when Morton did an attack that did 98% of my health, and I instantly gamed over. Instantly killing someone for not using a Thing card is one of the worst things about this game. It's not that I was super frustrated by it, but I'm just baffled that this mechanic is even in the game. What if you just never picked up the fire extinguisher? You lost the boss fight because you didn't pick up some arbitrary item along the way. What if you picked up the fire extinguisher but you didn't have the Thing card in your inventory? You just lost the boss fight because you were missing one specific card. I can't imagine the satisfaction of beating the boss in one try is that good to begin with. All you did was put out a fire with a fire extinguisher, and there's absolutely nothing clever about that. Maybe you're 6 years old and you feel really smart for figuring out which Thing card to use, but that payoff can't possibly be worth the amount of frustration that some players will face. Every boss in the game requires a certain Thing card in order to kill them, and each fight only gets worse as you progress through the game. Once you get a big paint star, all the toads at Port Prisma have a giant dance party like it's an ending to a fucking DreamWorks movie. Mario also gets an HP upgrade every time he retrieves a big paint star, which is once again the same kind of linear progression that ruins the replayability of the game. The earlier games were very solid RPGs. They were a little gimmicky for a turn-based RPG, but they all allowed the player to play the game however they wanted. If you wanted to only upgrade one specific stat, there's nothing stopping you from doing that, and the player has the freedom and choice to play the game to whatever playstyle they wanted. I've played the first 2 games so many times because each playthrough was inherently different from one another. I could change my badge abilities to cater to whatever playstyle I wanted, while also upgrading my HP and flower points to whatever levels I needed. Paper Mario Color Splash just doesn't offer this kind of variety. Once you beat the game, a second playthrough will be exactly the same as the first. You could argue that your paint capacity might be higher or lower depending on how many hammer scraps you collected, but as I said before, the paint doesn't matter. Since Super Paper Mario, this choice has been taken away from the player, which fundamentally ruins the whole concept of an RPG. The appeal of RPGs in the first place was the freedom of choice, and the later games have continued to create terrible systems that remove choice from the equation. I'm sure they planned on letting the player level up their HP, but then they wouldn't be able to instantly kill you for no fucking fucking reason, so they clearly had to scrap that. Bowser then shows up and kidnaps Princess Peach, because it's a fucking Mario game. The big paint star also paints a very large area, which opens up new places you can travel to. The path eventually leads you to Marmalade Valley, where you need to get permission from the professor in order to access an excavation site. The game builds him up as an important NPC, but he's just a normal fucking Toad. The problem with Color Splash is that every character is ripped straight from the Super Mario series, which is a complete misunderstanding of what makes the series special. The best part of the Paper Mario series is seeing Mario interact with characters he wouldn't normally be around. Paper Mario had unique characters before it was even a standard of the series. It was a pretty basic game, but it still had a ton of variety and original characters of its own. Paper Mario Color Splash doesn't even have the basic Koopa or Goomba NPCs from previous games. It just floods the world with Toads and Shy Guys and only gets more frustrating the more you notice it. The Koopalings make up all the major boss fights in the game, which completely kills any surprises the game could have made. There's nothing interesting about these characters because I've already seen the Koopalings before. If I wanted to see the Koopalings, I would go play Super Mario Bros. 3 or one of the many Mario games that they're already in. Once you make your way back to Marmalade Valley, you can finally explore the rest of the level with the professor's permission. You eventually run into the professor's chain chomp, which results in an instant game over if it runs into you. The game is strangely obsessed with giving you instant game overs to give the illusion that the game is challenging. Some might believe that it makes the game hard, but anyone who's experienced with video games clearly sees that it's just trial and error. You then bring a bone that you can use to attract the chain chomp back to the professor's house. He rewards you with a sharp spike, which you can use to progress through Kiwano Temple. The enemies in Paper Mario Color Splash are simply treated as obstacles, and Kiwano Temple is a perfect example of it. A majority of the level involves navigating over spiked pits, where enemies keep throwing projectiles across your path in order to force a confrontation. The game tends to force you into these passive-aggressive situations, where you have to fight enemies in order to progress through the level. I think the reason they do this is because the enemies in the game are so easy to deal with. Most of the random enemies on the map can be avoided, while others are completely passive and ignore Mario completely. Typically, an enemy on the ground will guard a hidden block or a painted area that will hold cards. The challenge in these situations is to ignore the enemies and try to get some cards, where battles are treated as a punishment for not avoiding the enemies. To be fair, the earlier Paper Mario games also treated enemies as obstacles, but the overall challenge was overcoming the battle itself. When you get hit by an enemy in the old Paper Mario games, all you can think about is overcoming the battle to avoid getting a game over. When you get hit by an enemy in Paper Mario Color Splash, all you can think about are the cards you're about to waste. Every problem with the enemy design can be traced back to the new battle system. The classic battle system works so well because it's consistent. Since the developers know you'll always be able to use your jump and hammer, they can make their enemies hyper aggressive and tricky to avoid. Mario will always have the tools at his disposal to deal with any situation. Combat isn't nearly as consistent in Paper Mario Color Splash. Your performance in battle is completely dependent on what cards you happen to have at the time, so developers wanted the player to be able to avoid most encounters. Every enemy in Paper Mario Color Splash can easily be circle strafed that never pose any kind of challenge. The Paracoopas in particular are so sluggish that it looks like they're moving in slow motion. You eventually make your way to the Coliseum where the next big paint star is located. You end up running into Iggy for another boss fight that requires another thing card. The game drops some hints that you'll need the bone card, but I think this is a situation that they didn't need to tell you. You just use the bone card to lure the professor's chain chomp back to his home, and Iggy also rides a chariot with a chain chomp. It's actually a clever lead to hint the player into using the bone card. The main problem is that the player has already used the bone card at this point, and you can't buy another bone card from the Ringler. Another bone card is hidden within the Coliseum, but the game blocks you off from exploring the majority of the level. There's nowhere else to go besides entering the Coliseum as a competitor. The game corrals the player into a boss fight that they can't possibly win at the time. Once you either run away or get insta-killed by Iggy, the Coliseum opens up and you can then get the bone card required to win. The player shouldn't be able to access a boss fight if they don't have the proper thing card yet. All it does is lead to a ton of frustration. It doesn't feel good to run away from boss fights, and it feels worse to get insta-killed by the boss for not having a thing card that you couldn't even buy from the Ringler. Another big paint star is recovered, once again unlocking a new area Mario can access. The Dark Bloo Inn is the next level, which is a haunted hotel inspired by the ghost houses from the Super Mario series. As I said before, the worst part of the game is the lack of variety. This would have been the perfect opportunity to maybe introduce some Boo characters, but the game keeps shoving toads down the player's throat. On top of the already overdone ghost house theme, the toads that run the hotel Hotel are so bland that there's nothing unique about the level. Plum Park is the next level, and the goal is to get a teapot for some toad ghosts at the dark Bloo Inn. You eventually run into Petty Piranha, who is using the teapot to poison the water. Petty Piranha acts as a mini-boss, and it kinda gives you an idea of what the boss fights would be like without the use of thing cards. Since the battle system doesn't require that much strategy, the entire fight just involves using your most powerful cards to win. The boss fights used to be about enemy positioning and attacking certain enemies, but the new battle system completely drops this from the gameplay. The only control you have is based on what position you place your cards in. Your first card will hit the first enemy, your second card will hit the second enemy, and the third card will hit the third enemy. Once the cards are placed down, all you can do is perform your action commands and watch Mario perform all of his card actions. It might take some skill to figure out what cards you have to use in order to effectively kill every enemy in one turn, but it's had a negative impact on the boss fights. Some of the hardest boss fights in the earlier games would overwhelm the player with different choices, and it was up to the player to figure out what to do. Since you can no longer choose who to attack, the boss fights can't challenge the player with complex situations. Even if the game decided to let you choose, you're limited by what cards you have, which once again limits the player's choices. They could have made boss fights exactly the same as the previous games, but it would only shine a light on how terrible the card system is. If the boss fight required you to jump on an enemy, but you didn't have the jump card, you would realize just how terrible the whole battle system is, and it would be Sticker Star all over again. Instead of fixing a broken system, they just dumbed down the entire game to make it easy and hope that no one would notice. It's around this part of the game that you need to find the yellow rescue squad toads in order to progress. If you can't figure out where they are, you can just talk to the rescue squad captain at Port Prisma. The game's pretty good at telling the player where to go or if you're wasting your time at a place you shouldn't be at. Since it's able to keep a consistent pace, you never get frustrated trying to figure out what to do. Sticker Star was frustrating because it constantly halted progress with all of its sticker puzzles, but Paper Mario Color Splash is perfectly content with not wasting your time. There's even a character that will give you hints on what thing card you'll need in the future, which removes a ton of frustration on figuring out what to do. You eventually make your way to Cobalt Base, where a Sniffet is willing to sell you a deck of 30 cards for 1,000 coins. I actually wanted to buy the deck from the Sniffet, but I would have to go into my inventory and toss out some cards, so I just declined the offer. Once I walked into the base, I was instantly thrown into a random game show. The game show was all about figuring out what cards are shown on screen. The problem with the whole show is that you have to answer the questions by using cards from your own deck. This means that if you didn't come to the game show without the cards shown on screen, you'll get the question wrong because you can't put the card as an answer. You have to buy the deck of cards from the Sniffet in order to progress through the game show section, so I got a very long and drawn out instant game over. It's frustrating because there's no possible way I could have seen this coming. It's just the same kind of trial and error bullshit the game has been so obsessed about. The game is also going to ridiculous lengths to only include Shy Guys into the game. Instead of making underwater characters like bloopers or Cheep Cheeps, they just put Shy Guys underwater. And I know they're actually called Sniffets, but they're fucking Shy Guys. They have a mask. It's a Shy Guy. If it's got a turtle shell, it's a Koopa. I don't fucking care. The next level is Fort Cobalt, which once again holds the next big paint star. If you weren't tired of Shy Guys yet, Fort Cobalt will finally put the nail in the coffin. You can even talk to some of the generic Shy Guys if they have a text bubble above their character. The older games were able to differentiate the friendly NPCs from the enemies by just making them look different, but that's a lot of work. The next boss in the game is Ludwig. This is the first boss fight that actually revolves around some kind of gimmick. The entire area is littered with tail cards, and the whole strategy is to counter all of Ludwig's projectiles in order to attack him. It took me a while to figure out that I had to use the tail cards, and it was pretty enjoyable at first. The battle took a very long time, but then Ludwig went underwater and I couldn't hit him anymore. I spent some time trying to figure out what to do, and then Ludwig instantly killed me. Once I got to the game over screen, Huey told me that I didn't even have the thing card required to beat the boss in the first place. This has to be one of the most frustrating parts of the game, because it just confirmed the situation I imagined when I was fighting Morton. All of that time wasted, and it was for a battle I was bound to lose from the beginning. Violet Passage is the next level, where Mario has to set sail with a group of pirates in order to find the next big paint star. The game tells me that they're pirates, but they just look like normal fucking toads. The captain of the ship is just a red toad with a pirate hat and a sword. Developers could have designed these characters to be literally anything else, but that's a lot of work. The easier solution is to copy and paste a sword and hat onto a generic toad sprite and call it a day. You eventually make your way to the next big paint star located at Lighthouse Island. The next boss in the game is Wendy. The fight is pretty standard and the whole gimmick is blocking her attacks at the beat of the music. I actually didn't have that much trouble fighting her because I just happened to come to this boss fight prepared. At the island, you find a note telling you need to clear the bonus round of the game show. Winning the bonus round will reward you with the camera you need to beat Wendy. When I got stuck on the Ludwig boss fight, fight, I thought that the thing card required was hidden at the game show. It just so happened to be the camera instead, which I thought was an optional thing card at the time. I wasn't really frustrated by the Wendy fight, but the whole idea of it rubbed me the wrong way. In order to beat her, you have to backtrack all the way across the map to do a stupid fucking game show you've already done. If the game didn't beat it into my head that I need to use the camera, I would have never used it. Besides the obvious note telling you how to get the camera, Wendy literally asks you to take her picture and tells you to say cheese. The functionality of the camera just makes no fucking sense, which is why the game told you to use it in the first place. At a first glance, you'd imagine that the camera would use its flash and stun her. Instead, the camera takes a picture of Mario, places the picture in front of him, and the picture functions as a substitute for Wendy's attacks. The problem with a lot of the thing cards is that they function with whatever backwards logic the game decides, which makes some of the cards completely unpredictable as to what they do. The big paint star finally unlocks access to the Mustard Cafe, where Mario and Huey fall down a giant sinkhole. Mario finds Huey unconscious, where Mario shrugs his shoulders as the game tells you Huey isn't breathing. This is the first moment in the game that actually made me laugh. The reason I find it funny is because it makes Mario look like a terrible person, and it's a joke that wouldn't have been made in a traditional Mario game. People seem to really enjoy the writing for this game, but I haven't enjoyed it as much as everyone else has. This is a little bit of a nitpick, but I feel like the humor is too safe. There aren't many moments that really stood out to me that were on par with the earlier games. I'm not saying that the earlier games were literary masterpieces, but the humor was always focused on the Super Mario series. The reason Bowser's personality was so funny was because it completely subverted the expectations of his character. Bowser is treated as the menacing final boss in the Super Mario series, but in Paper Mario he's a complete fool. Rogueport is an interesting setting for the Thousand Year Door, not because it's a shitty terrible town, but because Mario is in it. It's hilarious when Mario is framed for murdering a penguin. All of these jokes take a jab at Mario, and the game's writing subverts the expectations of the Super Mario series. When Super Paper Mario was released, the internet just started becoming popular amongst mainstream audiences, and the humor seemed to shift into a different style. Now most of the jokes are all about subverting your expectations by being random or breaking the fourth wall. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just not my kind of humor. The immediate goal at this part of the game is to move a train of passengers to the Tangerino Grill. Mario has to help cook some food. Much like game shows, preparing meals is also a Paper Mario tradition that is usually in each game. The implementation of it feels a bit awkward though, since these sections of the game are usually done when you're playing as Princess Peach. Halfway through this elaborate process of cooking pizza, I just stopped and thought about it for a second. Like, why the fuck am I even doing this? Wasn't there some big paint stars we were supposed to get? One of the most frustrating moments involving the thing cards happens at Tangerino Grill. There's a giant freezer in the back of the kitchen that has a magnifying glass frozen in ice. I picked up an ice pick and realized this was the perfect item to destroy the ice. When I used the thing card, it just didn't work. The fucking ice pick didn't destroy the ice. Apparently the more reasonable solution is to get a giant hair dryer to melt the ice instead. How fucking stupid of me. Once you serve all the passengers, you have to make food for the special VIP guest. It's at this part of the game where you have to fight a giant sentient piece of steak. You're supposed to tenderize the steak by attacking it, salt and pepper the steak with the salt and pepper shakers, grill the steak with the barbecue, and then squirt lemon on the steak with the lemon. I went into this the first time not having the salt and pepper shakers, so I immediately failed the first attempt. I then backtracked to pick up the salt and pepper shakers and then tried again, and I failed. The thing that I was doing wrong was that I was jumping on the steak to damage it. Apparently you're only supposed to use your hammer, which is completely fine, but why the fuck am I battling a giant piece of steak? You eventually make your way to the Sunset Express, where another big paint star is located. Larry is the boss fight for the level, and his boss fight really highlights the problems with the card system. A toad behind Mario is trying to stop a Shy Guy from giving Larry health items, but if you don't take out the line of enemies in one turn, they'll attack the toad. The only problem with the boss fight is that taking out the line of enemies requires no skill whatsoever. The only thing that matters is what cards you just happen to have at the time. There are essentially 4 kinds of cards that matter in the game. There's the high damage jump and hammer attacks, and the multiple hitting jump and hammer attacks. I didn't have that many multiple hitting attack cards in my deck, so I got caught in an instant loop where I couldn't stop the enemies from attacking the toad. The worst part about this was that I couldn't even run away. I just had to give up and kill myself. Once I bought the right kind of cards, I came back and completely wiped the floor with Larry. The worst part about the card system is that I knew exactly what to do, but I just couldn't do it. You now have to navigate the volcano area to get certain thing cards in order to get access to the green energy plant. Mario fucking blue skidoos into a TV, with the whole TV world being themed after Super Mario Bros. 3. You can press the Y button to switch perspective, similar to Super Paper Mario. It's a little bizarre at first, but it's actually a little sad when you think about it. Like I said before, the interesting thing about Paper Mario is seeing Mario interact with things outside of the Super Mario series. To put it simply, there's nothing interesting about Mario being in a Super Mario game. You eventually make your way to the Emerald Circus, which is where the last big paint star is located. This is the final section of the game where you have to round up 50 Rescue Squad Toads in order to gain access to the circus tent. Lemmy is inside the tent, who is the final boss for this level. He's also one of the only bosses in the game that requires you to use 2 thing cards in order to beat him. You have to pop his ball with the ice pick, which is pretty straightforward, but you also have to use the disco ball, which distracts him because he has to dance to the music. If you try to pop his ball without using the disco ball on the same turn, he'll just dodge the attack. It's a standard boss fight that revolves around the same bullshit you've seen up to this point. With all the big paint stars recovered, the final path towards Bowser finally opens up. A rainbow road appears, where Luigi comes out of nowhere inside a go-kart in order to drive him up to Bowser's castle. It's a little quirky moment, but again, there's nothing interesting about Mario being in a go-kart. There's been 8 games that do just that. There's another boss fight with Roy, and it has to be one of my worst fights in the game. Knowing that I would eventually fight Bowser, I stocked up on a ton of unpainted cards from the shop. Since paint isn't a valuable resource, I could paint every single card and never have to worry about it. In the rare occasion I would run out of paint, I even had a ton of 1-up mushroom cards that replenished my paint as backup. Once I reached this boss fight, the game decided to take away all of my 1-up mushroom cards away, as well as all of my paint. Since I had no way of painting my cards, I quickly ended up doing horrible damage against Roy. The worst part about this boss fight is that there's no possible way I could have seen this coming. Much like the boss fight with Larry, the whole challenge to the fight is just showing up with the right cards. Roy eventually filled the entire room with black paint and you can't see anything. I didn't even bother trying to figure out which thing card to use because it's just easier to get instantly killed and figure it out later. The game is such backwards logic that I'd rather just wait for the game to tell me what I did wrong so I could save myself the hassle of trying to figure it out. I eventually returned to Roy with a bunch of fully painted cards and completely destroyed him. The entire outcome of the match was completely determined by what cards I brought to the fight. There wasn't any skill involved or any strategy needed. The final boss fight against Bowser is actually the best boss fight in the entire game. It's the only boss fight that doesn't involve using the thing cards, with some gimmicks of its own that actually work in the game's favor. The most interesting gimmick is during his final form, where you have to remove the black paint from Bowser's body and absorb it using Huey. During the boss fight, I actually ran out of cards to attack Bowser, and I was worried that I would have to start everything all over again. Luckily, the boss fight seemed a bit scripted, since you only have to absorb his paint 10 times, which worked out in my favor. Once you rescue Princess Peach, the entire castle starts collapsing on itself. Black paint is flooding the entire castle and will eventually fall down towards Port Prisma. In a last-ditch effort, Huey squeezes the entire castle into a thing card. Huey then takes the black paint far away from Port Prisma to stop this from ever happening again. It's not the best ending of all time, but it could have been worse. Paper Mario Color Splash is a game that left no impact on me whatsoever. I never got too mad that I stopped playing the game, but I never enjoyed the game as much as I hoped I would. I talked about every Paper Mario game so far, and this has to be the most forgettable one I've ever played. Everyone loves to talk shit about Sticker Star, but at least there's something worth talking about. All of the terrible mechanics in the game are directly ripped from Sticker Star, while the rest of the game adds nothing new to the conversation. A lot of people say that Color Splash is at least better than Sticker Star, but this has to be the lowest standard you could have possibly set for this game. If anything, Color Splash fits right alongside Super Paper Mario and Sticker Star as another terrible spin-off game that no one wanted. The only people who really enjoy these spin-off games are the dipshit little kids who played them first. There's nothing wrong with that, because these games are actually designed for toddlers. They're so brain dead easy that it's an embarrassment to even call them video games in the first place. I once said that Paper Mario is dead, and while it's still very much true, I still had to try this game out to see if it was any good. It wasn't that good, but it wasn't bad either. It felt like nothing really happened. I'm sure that in 10 years, all the kids grew up playing Paper Mario Color Splash will remind me that's the greatest game of all time. Whenever that happens, I hope I remember that the game even existed.